UFC Fight Night Nicolau versus Pearce is taking place this weekend, and I'll be giving you my full predictions and breakdown to the whole entire card. I hope you enjoy it. Kicking off the prelims with the first fight of the card, we have Gabriel Benitez versus Maheshate. Now, when we look at Benitez, he does have decent submission game, but he is out of his prime. He's 35 years old. His last five performances, inconsistent. 2 wins, 3 losses, few of them being KOs, as well as getting absolutely dominated by Jim Miller as well. Then when we look on Machete's side, he's early in his career, he doesn't have as much experience as Benitez does, but he is big for the lightweight division at 6 foot. He's got the strike speed advantage and he's got the KO power advantage as well. When you look at his counter striking, especially versus Steve Carlos, his counter striking is deadly. He has very good check hooks, and his right hand is an absolute pistol. He has a good leg reach. I mean, he uses his teeps for his distance management very well, and he's got pretty decent recovery. I mean, when we look at the experience as well as that recovery, when he fought Borshev, who is looking very good at the moment, is very on form. I mean, he did very well against him in that first round before he got finished. And ultimately, I just think that Maheshate is just too rangy, accurate, and powerful for Benitez. And I think it'll be a Maheshate round 2 TKO. Moving on up the card, we have Ivana Petrovic versus Liang. When we look at Ivana Petrovic, never been finished most of her fights. She has a decent clinch game. And when it comes to short and long distance, she can utilize both. She's got a good reach advantage at 3 inches, and she's got that clinch game as well. She did lose her debut against Luana Carolina, and we kind of look at how Luana Carolina's gone, so we can kind of see the caliber of this fight. I mean, she's losing to Molly McCann, and then if Petrovic is losing to Carolina, we're definitely seeing the caliber of this fight. And on that as well, when we look at that Luana Carolina fight, Petrovic was overcommitting to her strikes heavily. And I think when we look at it compared to Liang could possibly take advantage of that with the speed. She does have the experience advantage as well, but I think that one of her biggest issues is that when she goes in for her wrestling game, she gets caught when she is shooting in for it. It's clear when we look at her against Gomez Juarez when she just got absolutely flatlined. She's been finished in all 3 UFC fights by KO, TKO, and she's just very poor on the feet, so I don't think that speed advantage is going to actually play into it at all. It's honestly really hard to say anything for her at this point in time. I think her chin's cracked at this point, and I just don't think she's UFC level. I think if she loses this fight, she'll get cut, which I think that Petrovic does have that finishing capability there, and I think that she's going to get it done in round 2 by a TKO. Moving up the card, James Llontop versus Chris Padilla. Now, when we look at James Llontop, 12-fight win streak, amazing momentum. He's got great technical striking, and he picks his shots very well. If you look back at him on the regional scene in his last couple of performances, he is very calm and calculated when picking those shots, especially those body kicks. He's got very fast body kicks. And even when he needs to, when he closes the distance, he's very strong in the clinch, picks his shots very well in the clinch too. When it comes to his takedown game, he utilizes the whizzer very well to keep the fight on the feet. His last fight on the regional scene, they were trying to utilize a lot of clinching, a lot of takedown attempts because they were getting pieced up on the feet. And I mean, he even utilized the whizzer very well in the Contender Series fight that he had against Malik Lewis, who was very decent himself. And to go along with that, he's got very good stamina and his chin is pretty granite as well. I mean, he's absorbed a fair few strikes in the fights that I saw. It just didn't really faze him at all. Didn't see him get dropped once. Now, when we look at Chris Padilla, he's got a 3-inch reach advantage. He does have a stronger submission game, but his base isn't very strong. When we look at his last fight on the regional scene, his opponent was very heavy on the leg kicks. I think every single time that Padilla got leg kicked, his base just got completely swept out from beneath him. He just fell on his ass every single time. And I mean, if you're getting swept off your feet like that and you're going against someone that is that technical a striker and then can commit to that ground game, it could honestly lead to a TKO pretty easily. Ultimately, I think Llontop does seem to be a different level in that striking department, and he has very good takedown defense to go along with that. But I think when we do look at Padilla, he has shown that he is quite durable across his regional scene fights. So I will say that Llontop will take a clear decision in this fight. Moving up the card, we have Marnic Mann versus Ketlen Souza. Now, when we look at Marnic Mann, she is fairly durable, but she's just way too small. She's too small for even the strawweight division. She needs to be an atomweight fighter, which the UFC doesn't have. And along with that, I just don't think that she's UFC caliber, just like Liang. I think that she's just going to struggle way too much at the lowest division that the UFC has. And the biggest issue for her is these bigger framed fighters. I mean, in her last fight against Knudsen, she just completely manhandled her. Understandably, it was on short notice, but even if she had the full camp, that fight was going no other way. She was going to get dominated regardless. And when we look at Ketlen Souza, she has that bigger frame that Marnic Mann cannot deal with. Ketlen Souza has the 3-inch reach advantage, and she has stronger stand-up than her. The only thing that I could see as like a little bit of concern for Ketlen Souza is her track record at strawweight. She's lost 3 out of her 4 fights there, but when it comes to this fight in particular, I'm not really too worried about it, again, because it's a framing issue. Aside from that, there could possibly be some mobility issue after Karine Silva landed her that knee bar injury about a year ago. So she has been out with an injury, and this is her first fight back. So it'll be interesting to see how she does come back from that. But aside from that, she's just got the stronger overall stand-up and has twice the experience over Marnic Mann. And I don't think she'll get the finish with the cut back down. I'll be honest, I think with Marnic Mann's durability, I don't think Ketlen Silva will get the mix of the durability and moving back down to strawweight, which will cut down that power a bit, and her gas tank. I don't think she'll get the finish, but I do think she'll get a pretty clear decision win. Moving up the card, we have Don'Tale Mayes versus Caio Machado. When we look at Don'Tale Mayes to start off with, kind of going on that trend of that overall frame advantage, he does have the bigger frame. He's got a 3-inch reach advantage. He's decent when he actually utilizes his jab, which he is very inconsistent with his performances, but I swear whenever he utilizes his jab and his head movement, like he did against Andrei Arlovski, he finds success. Along with that, I will say his stamina isn't terrible. He did get pieced up in the first round and had his nose busted up against Nascimento, which should have stuffed up his breathing, but he didn't actually really slow down in the later rounds of that fight. Throughout the second and the third round, he was actually still keeping up a pretty good pace. I will admit though, aside from his jab, his strikes are pretty slow. When we look at Caio Machado, he is a high volume striker with more speed. He picks his shots a lot better, and he does have a stronger ground game than Don'Tale Mayes has. But one of his biggest issues is that he can be overly passive. He coasted way too much against Parkin, and Parkin is a very good technical striker. So obviously I do understand that he probably have to be a bit more calculated in that fight. But in all honesty, I think this is a bit underrated, but I think that Don'Tale can just keep a higher pace over the length of the fight if he doesn't get finished. I mean, if he can keep that pace up throughout that fight, use the reach, use his jab, use his head movement, I think that Don'Tale can actually pull out a decision win here. Moving up the card, we have Austin Hubbard versus Michael Figlak. Now, when we look at Austin Hubbard, he's more experienced, he's had that tough experience, and he's also had that feeling of getting cut and coming back into the UFC, so it's more of an urgency for him to start winning fights. He's 32 at the moment, he's literally in that middle of that prime age range, and when we look at him statistically compared to Figlak, better defensively on the feet, and he has a higher striking accuracy than him, as well as a better ground game than him, in my opinion, actually. And one of the biggest takes for Hubbard is his 5-round experience. He got 5-round experience before he actually got into the UFC. And that 5-round experience is going to be a huge pro for him because Figlak is such an aggressive, fast starter. I mean, we saw that against Ziam in Paris in his last fight that he lost, his UFC debut. Granted, he's never been finished. Ziam almost finished him, but that is intertwined with how fast of a starter he is and how aggressive he is. He just doesn't have a care in the world. He just goes balls to the wall and just tries to finish. But the problem with Figlak as well is he doesn't really have another game to resort to, in the fact that he's just not comfortable on the ground. From what we saw in that Ziam fight, he's not only not comfortable on the ground, he has very poor takedown defense. He got taken down multiple times in that fight, and Hubbard definitely has the ability to drag him down to the ground with his effective takedowns. And I believe if Hubbard can use his range as well and slow Figlak down with a combination of outpointing him as well as taking him down, I think he can ultimately slow Figlak down. And if he can slow Figlak down, I think it's his game. And with that, I think he will do it, and I think he'll get a pretty clear decision out of that. Moving up the card, we have Rani Yahya versus Victor Henry, the feature prelim fight. When we look at Rani Yahya, he's a veteran. He's been around the UFC. He's been around MMA for a long time. I mean, he has a clear submission advantage in this fight. Very good at grappling. He has decent single leg takedowns to definitely get the fight there. But I think that without the single legs and running the pipe, I just don't think he has any other real takedowns in his arsenal, especially with his athleticism now being 39 years old. He just doesn't have a very good takedown accuracy overall, and he needs the fight to get to the ground to win it. I mean, he's 21-1 in submissions, and he's 0-3 in KOs and TKOs. Now, he's 39 years old. He's out of his prime, and when it comes to someone like Victor Henry, who, yes, is 36 years old, but he is agile still, very agile. He's shown that in literally his last 5 fights. I mean, throughout his whole career, he hasn't really slowed down, to be honest. And when it comes to Victor, I mean, his ability to switch stances there, I mean, he can keep Rani guessing on the feet if Rani wasn't already at a disadvantage on the feet. His striking output completely outmatches Rani Yahya. And also, along with that, Victor's never been finished, ever, by submission, KO, TKO. And it's very impressive because he doesn't actually engage in action takedowns that often either. So he's mainly on the feet, and he's never been finished, except almost by that nut shot in that last fight he had. But anyway, Victor also has a 78% takedown defense, which is going to make it harder for Rani Yahya to get the fight to the ground, which is where he's going to utilize his best weapon, obviously being his grappling. And the big issue there is because Victor has such a good sprawling capability. I mean, ultimately, Victor's striking output is just going to be way too much for a 39-year-old Rani Yahya. And I think he's just going to be able to keep up that pace throughout the whole fight and keep that whole fight standing, which is where Rani Yahya, I honestly think, is probably just going to be a sitting duck. Being that veteran, I think he is crafty in the way he can mitigate that damage, however. I mean, in over 40 fights, he has only been finished by KO TKO 3 times, which is pretty impressive. But I think ultimately, when it comes to this fight, I've got to go for either a round 3 TKO or possibly a decision for Victor Henry in this one. Now moving on to the main card, we have for the first fight, Tim Means versus Uros Medic. When we look at Tim Means, he's a veteran, just like Rani Yahya. He's fought some of the top fighters. He's still got amazing KO power. I mean, the KO power is the last thing to leave. He's got great clinch knees. He wrecked Andre Fialho with those and got him cut. But he is 40 years old. He does have a great top position though. I mean, he's very long. He's a very long fighter. I mean, he stands very tall. He's 6'2", and he generates a lot of power with his ground and pound. because he is so long, so he can generate it with those longer limbs. When it comes to this matchup specifically, it's just not great for him because he just doesn't have a history of being able to secure takedowns easily. Now, when it comes to looking at takedowns specifically, when you're looking at someone like Uros Medic, who has finished all of his wins, has amazing KO power, has great kicks, unorthodox striking methods as well. I mean, we look at that spinning back fist against Semmelsberger. He just definitely has that finishing capability. He's got a 60% strike accuracy as well, and a higher output than Tim Means too. Medic is at a prime age with better strike speed, and that means especially with his straight left as well. I mean, he was tagging Semmelsberger with that straight left all day in their fight, and it was doing a lot of damage. Cut him open pretty much instantly. When it comes to both of them, I mean, they're both susceptible to submissions, definitely. But I think this just isn't a good matchup for Means, with it it's just mainly gonna be staying on the feet, I think, in this one. He just doesn't have the takedown capabilities to get Uros down. And I think that Uros's striking capability, as well as him being in his prime, and he's in that prime age range now, he's 31 years old. I honestly think that this is going to be a point where Means is going to get TKO'd for a finish in round 2. Moving up the card, we have Jonathan Pearce versus David Onama. Now, when we look at Jonathan Pearce, great wrestling, and especially his positioning within his wrestling. He showed it very well against Christian Rodriguez, who is very good with his transitions himself on the ground. Pearce uses his transitions very well to either get into safe positions or to set himself up for either KOs or submissions. Now, when it comes to being able to out-grapple Christian Rodriguez, I mean, Christian Rodriguez is pretty much dominating all these up-and-coming talents like Raul Rosas Jr., Cameron Simon, and a couple others at this point. So it's really showing those levels to that grappling game, which Jonathan Pearce is definitely going to be able to utilize in this matchup specifically, I think, especially because he not only has the KO power threat, but I think the biggest thing in this matchup, he has good cardio, which also on the feet with that KO power, he can mix things up very well because of his switch stance capabilities. Now, when we look at Onama, he's very well-rounded, a finisher. He's pretty much finished all of his fights. He hasn't gone to a decision once unless it's for a loss. He's explosive as well, and he does have a 3-inch reach advantage over Pearce, and his right hand is nasty. Honestly, he did sleep Nate Landwehr with it, but I don't know how Nate Landwehr just came back from the dead. I don't think that guy's human, to be honest. But nevertheless, he was in an absolute war with Nate Landwehr. And, I mean, he was tagging him over and over and over. Obviously, Nate Landwehr did get the better of the fight, but, I mean, he showed that he has got KO power moving in from the first, the second to the third round. Onama definitely has that ability to put Pearce's lights out with that power. But I honestly think this is probably the closest fight on this card. But I'm honestly going to say that I think that Pearce just has the pure wrestling pedigree to position himself where he can utilize his weight to drain Onama's gas tank to the point where he won't be able to knock him out. And I think from that, he'll be able to draw out a decision win. Moving up the card, we have Austin Lane versus Jhonata Diniz. Now, yes, I'm probably absolutely butchering that name, but we move on. When it comes to Austin Lane, I mean, he has the KO power. He has decent footwork as well. He's quite an agile heavyweight. He has pretty quick kicks, and he utilizes that 80-inch reach with his jab pretty well. But he is 36 years old, and when it comes to being a heavyweight, 36 years old isn't the biggest deal. I mean, it's not that bad. But when it comes to your fight style and how Austin Lane is stylistically, I think him getting older to that, even that age at heavyweight is going to be an issue because he likes to be on the outside. He likes to move around. He likes to utilize his jab. He likes little bit more of a point fighting style. And we could see that a lot in his fight against Tafa, which he did not look comfortable in at all and got finished badly. Now, when we're talking about confidence, that's not an issue for Jhonata Diniz. I mean, he is at his prime in his prime at the moment. He's 32 years old, and he's brimming with confidence. I mean, understandably so. He has so much momentum at the moment. Every fight he has won has been by round 1 KO or TKO. He's just a better kickboxer than Austin Lane is, and his strike output is better than his too. There's only one possible issue that I think Austin Lane could exploit, and that is that he's only been in MMA for about 2 years, which obviously kickboxing standpoint, striking standpoint does not matter. But when it comes to his ground game, it's more so unknown. And we do know that Austin Lane at least has one submission. So, I mean, if there is that possibility there by any means that Austin Lane could get it to the ground, try and get it to the ground, because that, I honestly think that is almost his only chance. Overall, Diniz is just a more experienced striker, and realistically, I just don't see how there is any way that Austin Lane is going to be able to get this done, and I'm gonna have to say that Diniz gets this done by round 1 KO. Moving up the card, we have Ariane Lipski versus Karine Silva. First up, when we look at Ariane Lipski, she's on a 3-fight win streak. She does have a bit of momentum to her name at the moment. She's very dangerous on the ground, and she had a very good performance in her last fight against Casey O'Neill. I mean, she lit her up on the feet. Ariane Lipski has pretty decent striking. I mean, she can overcommit to her strikes at times, but she does have KO power. And I mean, she rocked Casey O'Neill hard and then dropped her to the ground and submitted her by a pretty nasty armbar at that as well. And I think when it comes to that ground game as well, she is fairly defensively sound, but I think the worst part for Ariane Lipski is the compromised chin. She is very chinny. She's lost 4 fights by KO TKO. And when we look at someone like Karine Silva is a finisher. She's won all her fights by finish, which is so rare, not only for flyweight, but for any woman's fighter. You know, like it's pretty impressive. I mean, not to mention that she is a submission machine. She's on a 7-fight win streak, which is all by submissions, with 9 submissions overall in her career. So she is just on a tear with submissions, and she hasn't lost in 5 years. So it's going to be interesting to see how someone like Karine Silva goes up against Ariane Lipski, who's never been finished by submissions, which is where I think we would probably look a bit more at the KO TKO department. Obviously, I think that Karine does have that advantage in the submission department anyway, but when we do look at a minor con for Karine Silva, I think her striking is a little bit rudimentary. She has a good front kick, good kicks up the middle. Striking's a little bit slow, and just in terms of she's not much versatility there, but she does have the finishing power on the feet regardless anyway. I mean, she has 8 finishes by KO TKO on the feet. Ultimately, Ariane Lipski is good, but I genuinely just think Karine Silva is at the level of a top 5-10 range fighter in the flyweight division at the moment. I think she beats half of the flyweights that are ranked 5 to 10 at the moment. I'll definitely be surprised the way that Ariane Lipski went in her last fight against Casey O'Neill, and obviously the fact that Karine Silva has finished every single fight in her career. It'll just be interesting to see if this fight actually even goes to a decision or not, which, you know, a lot of the time it is a safer bet for those kind of fights to go to a decision, but I don't think this is going to be one of them. And I think that Karine Silva actually gets this done by TKO in round 2. Moving up the card to the co-main event, we have Ryan Spann versus Bogdan Guskov. Now, when we look at Ryan Spann, he's got an overall frame advantage. He's got very good KO power. Annihilated Dominic Reyes with a jab, and he's just fought better caliber of opponents than Guskov has. I mean, he also as well, Ryan, as a key to victory, realistically, the path that he wants to go down, he wants to get this to the ground, I would say as soon as possible, especially with his pedigree of choke finishes as well. I mean, if there's anything to go by with the Guskov and Ustamir fight, I think that's just going to be a big tell
for Spann to get it to the ground as soon as possible. Bit of an issue with Ryan Spann is his inconsistency though. He's definitely complacent when he's literally about to win and then fumbles the fight, which we saw against Bogdan's twin brother, Anthony Smith. Now, when we look at Bogdan Guskov, I mean, he's an absolute bulldozer. I mean, he's finished his last 7 wins by round 1 KO TKO, very similar to Diniz, but he's just not as versatile as Spann is on the feet. And I think that Spann can capitalize on that, and I think that Spann will be able to drop him and then get him in I think he'll get him in some form of submission finish, just as I said, very similar to the way Oezdemir finished Guskov. I think that Spann will get that round 2 submission after getting those reads, a bit of a feel in that first round. I think that round 2 sub's coming. Moving on to the main event, we have Matheus Nicolau versus Alex Perez. Now, when we look at Matheus, he's very well rounded. He's got the overall grappling game advantage. More so in the grappling sense, I'd definitely say the submission-based sense. I'd say you could possibly give the wrestling pedigree and that wrestling, pure wrestling advantage to Perez. I think when it comes to the feet, Nicolau is just faster than Perez. Now, when it does come to the feet, though, we could see some hesitancy because obviously Nicolau is coming off a pretty brutal KO loss via knee to Brandon Royval. So his chin could definitely be suspect at the moment. Now, when we look at Alex Perez, I mean, he's fought the top of the division, but he hasn't quite got there. I mean, he fought Figueiredo and lost. He fought Pantoja and lost. And we know that he's prone to sub threats as well. I mean, he's pretty prone in the submission game. Granted, after taking 2 years off and then coming back and fighting Muhammad Mokaev, he did look very good defensively against Mokaev. I mean, he kept himself out of immediate danger, but he just couldn't really do anything offensively against Mokaev. And as I stated just before, I mean, before that Mokaev loss, the fight that he's just recently had, he had 2 years off. So, I mean, both him and Nicolau are at that kind of disadvantage there. Obviously, Perez didn't get knocked out. But, I mean, it's still, nevertheless, it is a disadvantage just based on ring rust. It's definitely going to be a close fight because, I mean, both have BJJ bases. Both are very even statistically, but I don't think Nicolau will be able to get a finish that easily against Perez. Mainly just because I think Perez is going to be so defensively sound. The problem with him being defensively sound, though, is that I think that he's going to be giving away points to make sure he doesn't take damage. Granted, Perez does have a higher output than Nicolau, but Nicolau's strikes are more accurate than Perez's, which when you're looking at accuracy versus output, accuracy is what's going to win you the point. I think that will be the deciding factor in the fight. So ultimately, I think that Nicolau will outpoint Perez to a 49-46 decision. Now, moving on to my fight card award predictions. First of all, we have Fight of the Night. Now, I think that Fight of the Night will go to Ryan Spann versus Bogdan Guskov. I just think the likelihood of a decision in that fight is very low, and I mean, they're more so probably looking at possibly getting it because they are higher up the card. I mean, they are names, and if Guskov can get it done, he gets ranked, so there is a bit on the line there. And, I mean, they both trade heavily, and they've both just got very, very ridiculous KO power. Now we look at performance of the night. I've got to give it to Matheus Nicolau to dominate Alex Perez to that 49-46 decision. Moving on, for the fighter to watch, I've got to give it to Karine Silva. I think that she's just going to continue that finish streak, and I think if she's able to chin Lipski, it's just going to be a tell for her moving into that top 10 ranking. I just think she's going to do some damage in the top 10. And after this performance, I mean, even after her last few performances, she's just a fighter that we need to watch. Moving up, we have the underdog. I think Austin Hubbard to outclass Michael Figlak. I mean, I haven't really picked that many underdogs on this fight card. I pretty much only Hubbard and Mays. But I do definitely think I'm more confident about Hubbard than Mays. I think Hubbard can definitely actually outclass Figlak and get that finish. Moving on, upset. I don't think there's going to be any real huge upset for the fight card. I just don't really see any. I mean, all the odds are fairly close, and for any of them that have pretty distant odds, I just don't see any of those fighters winning those fights. Now, when we look at finish of the night, I think it's just going to be Jhonata Diniz. Obviously, butchering that name again, I'm sure. But I think that he's going to flatline Austin Lane in that first round. If you've enjoyed this video, please check out my channel for more MMA content and feel free to like, comment, and subscribe.